He healed the sick with a touch, yet the Apostle Paul was tormented daily by a torture stake driven into his flesh, and God refused to heal him. The man who raised the dead and healed multitudes pleaded with God for healing 3 times, and 3 times the heavens answered with a disquieting silence, followed by a resounding no. How could the greatest apostle of Christianity, who carried miraculous power in his very hands, be left to suffer in agony throughout his life? What was the shadowy creature he called a messenger of Satan? These questions have echoed through the corridors of history for 2 millennia. Paul of Tarsus penned the letters that shaped Western civilization. His words founded churches, toppled pagan empires, and defined Christian theology. He was a spiritual giant, but behind the dried ink of his scrolls lay a man in constant, excruciating physical or mental pain. He called this torment a thorn in the flesh, an affliction so severe, so humbling, that he felt as if a demonic entity were beating him daily. Why would the Creator of the universe refuse to heal his most loyal servant? What exactly was destroying the body and mind of the Apostle Paul? Could it be a degenerative disease that shamed him in public? A physical deformity that made him repulsive to his listeners? Or are we facing something even more obscure and disturbing? The mystery of Paul's thorn hides one of the greatest secrets about human suffering recorded in the Bible. Paul's most vulnerable confession wasn't penned in a secret locked diary. It was laid bare in a public letter read aloud to multitudes. In 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 7, he shatters the protocol of an unshakable, untouchable leader. He reveals his deepest weakness. Paul describes an almost indescribable mystical experience, a moment when he was caught up to the 3rd heaven and heard inexpressible words. But the price of this celestial vision was terrible on earth. To keep him from becoming conceited by the surpassing greatness of the revelations, he was given what he describes as a thorn in the flesh. The original Greek word Paul chose to use here is skolopes, and this is where our modern understanding falters. When we hear the word thorn, we picture a tiny barbed splinter from a rose bush pricking a finger, a fleeting annoyance. But in classical antiquity, skolopes was no mere twig. The word described a sharpened wooden stake, the very same thick stake used to impale prisoners of war or torture enemies of the state. The pain Paul felt was no minor discomfort. It was a tearing agony, deep and continuous, as if a spear were driven into his body, slowly twisting with each passing day. And he states emphatically that this was a messenger of Satan sent to torment him. But why would God allow the devil to actively torture his chief ambassador? Imagine the brutal irony of this scene. The man who, in the book of Acts, caused handkerchiefs and aprons that touched his body to be carried to the sick, healing diseases miles away and casting out demons, this very colossal man kneels in the dust, broken, in a cold sweat, desperately pleading for relief. And he does this 3 times, a persistence that echoes Jesus himself in Gethsemane. But physical relief never came. The divine answer that tore through the heavens was simply a declaration, "My grace is sufficient for you." What could be so humbling, so debilitating, to make the giant of the New Testament plead 3 times for deliverance? Down through the centuries, physicians, theologians, and historians have tried to dissect the biblical texts to diagnose the apostle. And the clues scattered throughout his other epistles reveal a frightening clinical picture. The oldest and most persistent medical theory in biblical studies points directly to Paul's face, more specifically to his eyes.
Many researchers believe he suffered from chronic purulent ophthalmia. In ancient times, severe eye infections weren't treated with antibiotic eye drops. They weren't just painful, they were visually repulsive. The sufferer's face often became swollen and disfigured, exuding continuous fluids, forcing those around them to avert their gaze in disgust. This would perfectly explain Paul's strange and poignant declaration in his letter to the Galatians, chapter 4. He praises the Galatian Christians, saying if it were possible, they would have torn out their own eyes to give to him. Why the eyes, not the heart or the hands? Could this be a literal, macabre clue to his daily torment? Furthermore, at the end of the same letter, he writes a curious detail. He asks them to see with what large letters he was writing with his own hand. Was he blinding to the point of needing to draw immense letters on the scroll? But if the problem was merely visual, why the urgency in calling it a messenger of Satan? Other historical sleuths point to an invisible enemy, a brutal epidemic that ravaged the plains of the Mediterranean world, malaria. Sir William Ramsay, one of the greatest archaeologists and New Testament scholars, proposed that Paul contracted a severe and recurrent type of malaria in the marshy plains of Pamphylia during his first missionary journey. Malaria attacks come in merciless cycles, sky-high fevers that boil the blood, uncontrollable chills, profound delusions, and a headache that ancient physicians literally described as a stake piercing the skull. Exactly a skolops. Imagine trying to preach the message of salvation while your own body enters feverish convulsions, trembling violently under the relentless desert sun. Could this be the physical weakness that humbled him before his new congregations? The idea of a fragile, sickly leader preaching about an all-powerful God was a paradox difficult for the Greeks and Romans to swallow. But there are scholars who look at the symptoms and see an even darker diagnosis, something that in the first century carried an unbearable social stigma and often confused with demonic possession. Epilepsy was widely known in the Greco-Roman world as the sacred disease, or ironically, the disease of demons. Without warning, the patient would suddenly collapse to the ground, foaming at the mouth, rolling their eyes, and thrashing uncontrollably. For the superstitious of the time, there was no medical explanation. It was visual, undeniable, and terrifying, proof that an unclean spirit had taken possession of that person's body. How could an apostle of Christ, tasked with casting out demons, found churches if, in the middle of a sermon, he collapsed to the ground in violent convulsions? His enemies would certainly use this terrible image against him, and records show that they did. In 2 Corinthians chapter 10, Paul openly quotes what his opponents whispered behind his back. They said his letters were severe and strong, but his bodily presence was weak and his speech contemptible. Paul's bodily presence caused repulsion, pity, or even contempt. He was not the majestic, imposing, and heroic figure that Renaissance art painted in cathedral stained glass windows. He was most likely a physically broken man, perhaps disfigured by illness, whose speech might have been affected by neurological attacks or extreme exhaustion. But there's a fourth avenue of investigation into this mystery, a theory that completely abandons medical reports and turns its gaze to ancient Hebrew and Jewish tradition. In the Old Testament, the metaphorical expression of thorns is rarely used to describe physical ailments. In the book of Numbers, chapter 33, God warns the Israelites that if they did not drive out the inhabitants of Canaan, those peoples would be thorns in your eyes and goads in your sides. For many Jewish scholars and contemporary theologians, Paul's thorn in the flesh was not a disease, nor a virus, nor a neurological failing. It was people. It was the false apostles infiltrating the churches. It was the relentless persecutors who followed him, the very men who stoned him almost to death in Lystra, who brutally flogged him in Philippi,
who hunted him like an animal from city to city. The messenger of Satan would be, in this view, the constant and orchestrated human opposition that sought to destroy his ministry at every turn, an uninterrupted psychological and physical torture. Which of these theories holds the true identity of the torment? The purulent blindness, the cyclical malaria, the humbling epilepsy, or the brutal persecution by men? The absolute silence of the biblical text regarding the exact nature of Paul's thorn is not a historical accident or a failure of record. It is a brilliant and purposeful omission. If Paul had named his ailment as malaria, only those suffering from fever would identify with his struggle. If he had clearly stated it was epilepsy or blindness, only those with similar afflictions would find full solace in his letters. By keeping the thorn anonymous, Paul's torment transcends time and becomes universal. All of us, at some point on our journey, carry a sharpened stake driven into our flesh. It might be an incurable chronic illness, a silent mental disorder, a hidden addiction that consumes us, a destructive relationship, or an emotional pain that simply refuses to leave. Something that makes us fall to our knees in the dark, sweating and weeping, pleading with the heavens for this cup to be removed. And often, the answer we receive is the same silence Paul heard, followed by the same divine declaration. Perhaps we will never know with absolute certainty what the medical diagnosis was or the identity of the enemy, of the man who wrote half of the New Testament. But the answer he received in his darkest night echoes through 2,000 years of human history. My power is made perfect in weakness. The thorn was not removed. The miracle of physical healing did not happen, but the apostle found a supernatural strength to endure it until the end of his days, not because the pain diminished, but because its purpose revealed itself to be greater than the suffering itself. In our next episode, we will investigate the 7 trumpets of Revelation, a metaphor or literal. What do the cosmic sounds of destruction described by the Apostle John truly herald for the end of times?